Okay, so what can I help you guys with today?
Um, okay. So we are interviewing you about the first women on campus.
Okay,
So um if you don't mind for the interview introducing yourself, your name
sure.
and stuff you do on campus.
Sure. My name is Scott Giltner. I am a professor of history at Culver-Stockton. I'm also the chair of the Applied Liberal Arts and Sciences Division, and I have been at Culver-Stockton since 2005.
Nice. So now on to some background questions. What college did you attend?
Okay, so I attended Hiram College, which is a very similar school to Culver-Stockton, actually. It's in Northeast Ohio, about an hour south of Cleveland. It's a small private college affiliated with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the same as Culver-Stockton. About a thousand students, the same as Culver-Stockton. Um, and for me, that kind of small college environment where you got to know your professors and know everybody else on campus really well, and it was a nice, friendly place on a hill, that kind of thing, it kind of stuck with me. So when I was looking for a place to move on from the University of Pittsburgh, where I taught for a few years, which I liked, but it was in a city which I didn't like, I thought somewhere small like Hiram would be a good spot for me, and that's how I found Culver.
Cool. So what did you major in there?
I was a history major. I was lucky enough. I never really had a phase of stressing out over what I was going to do when I grew up. I knew I was going to be a history teacher since I was about 6 years old. I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I knew I was going to do it. So the stress was how I was going to get there. Was I going to teach high school or elementary school or college? And eventually I settled on college. But yeah, I've been a history person pretty much my whole life. I love stories. So history is perfect for that.
Cool. So now towards the Culver questions. What drawed you to come to Culver, as you kind of stated that, but
Sure. Well, I when I finished my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, I had been teaching there for 3 or 4 years at that point, and so first and foremost, I needed another job. There was a limit to how much fellowship support a university gives you, and usually when you're finished with your PhD, they sort of kick you out the door. So I had to find somewhere else to land. And I applied for a bunch of jobs and interviewed at a bunch of places. But when I came to Culver, it immediately felt like home. Everyone was so friendly. The campus was so nice. It just had a really good feel about it. And I like the fact that, you can't walk across campus without getting into a conversation with people. You know everybody. Sometimes it's a bit of a fishbowl, I suppose, but I guess that's the price you pay. So yeah, for me, it was just coming out here and seeing the place and meeting the people, and then also feeling like it felt familiar. It felt an awful lot like where I had gone to school.
nice. Um, so what is your fondest memory here at Culver?
Boy, that's a good question. There's a lot of really fond ones. I don't know that I could narrow one down without some more thought, but I'll mention a couple. Um, One of them, this is kind of silly, but it's memorable, so I'll answer your question honestly. So about the first month I was here, a U.S. senator was on campus to give an address about some kind of economic initiative. His name was Kit Bond. He was a Missouri senator, and I had, I was in grad school 2 months before that. I had just finished my PhD. I had just started the job, and Dr. Hodel and I went over to watch his press conference. And then when the press conference ended, the reporters all went with the senator's staff into another room to do all their, media stuff. And it was just the senator, the president of the college, Dr. Fox, and then Dr. Hodel and I. And I guess President Fox needed some help or something, so he called us over to talk to the senator. And when he introduced us, Senator Bond stuck out his hand and he said, "Doctor," and I said, "Senator," and I shook his hand. And when I got home, I called my dad. I was like, "Hey, Dad," he called me doctor, and I called him senator. It was so cool. So that's one that just stuck out because I was fresh out of grad school, and that just seemed super cool that I had met a U.S. senator. Um, Other than that, there's been so many good ones. I guess I feel like I have to almost legally say that my favorite memory of Culver was the first time I ever met my wife. She was an admissions counselor at the time, and I met her at an event in Marilot Chapel, like a recruiting event. And I remember talking to her and thinking, "Oh, I like her." And then a month or three later or so, we started dating, and the rest is history. So I guess I'll go with meeting my wife as another one. Now that I think about it, I should have said that first. So maybe she would get mad if she sees this video.
Okay. What is your favorite spot on campus?
Um, Generically, I would just say the classroom. I just love being in the classroom and working with students. In terms of, beyond that, just favorite spots on campus. I love the benches on the quad that overlook, the hill and the town and the river. Those are pretty great. And I'm a big fan of the library. I love the library. I'm a nerd, so library is a great spot.
And
Also,
if
the
you,
football stadium. I go to a lot of football games. So
if you had to choose one of your favorite classrooms, like which one would it be and why?
probably the one that we're in, 218. It's just a nice, light, airy room. Some classrooms are kind of dark and they don't feel very friendly. Our room has a pretty decent, friendly vibe about it. It's also relatively new, so it's not crappy, which is nice. So.
Cool.
So our next few questions we're going to ask you about are going to be more towards our female questions.
Sure.
So the first question we have is, do you have much knowledge about the first females on campus?
Well, I have a bit. So this is a topic that comes up from time to time. The college is pretty proud of that part of its history. And so I'm the college historian. So every once in a while, I have to speak about these kind of things. I don't know that I know as much or more than Dr. Campbell or some other people, but I've read a fair amount on it. And I think it's an important thing that our students and our faculty and staff need to know about.
Out of all the information you've read, what are some things you find very interesting?
Well, I like that question. One of the things I think is really interesting is how complex that story is. We'd like to think that it was just, wow, what a positive story of the college wanted to educate women, so they did, and it was smooth sailing and everything was fine. But we know it's more complicated than that. We know that even though they wanted to educate women side by side with men, they were super uneasy about the moral implications of women being on campus. So, the original plan was to have women from the beginning, and we started class in 1855, but they didn't want to have women on campus until we had a residence hall for them. They didn't want to have women live off campus in boarding houses because they thought, ooh, what kind of trouble would they get into? So when classes started in 55, women weren't even part of the story. And then a couple of years later, the Civil War came before we could build a women's residence facility. And then that delayed women's arrival even further. I don't think it was until 1867 or 68 when Alice Staples enrolled in the college. And then she becomes the first female graduate in 1870. So it's a great story, and we're proud to be the first college west of the Mississippi chartered, for coeducation specifically. But we also need to acknowledge that in that story, it's complex. Female students didn't really have the same access at first. Female students had different dress codes and different expectations of behavior. So, depending on how you look at that story, it's either a window into the sort of unfortunate gender politics of the 19th century, or it's a story about a college struggling with those expectations and trying to go in a more just direction. And it's probably both of those things, actually. So that's what I like most about it, is that it's a complex story. And then the other thing I like about it is if and I don't know enough about this, and I'm hoping we can figure this out through our project, but some of the names of some of the early female students that we know about, these are young women that went on to amazing things. They became founders of other colleges. They became professors at Christian University. They went on to become school teachers. So they did some pretty impressive things, and they really made their mark. So I like that early history of women at the college is one that shows that, educating women was a good idea and that we were ahead of our time.
That kind of leads us on to our next question is, What is one thing you feel like Culver handled the poorest when it came to like incorporating women into like Culver itself?
Yeah, I guess it's tough. We want to avoid judging other time periods on our views or our morality or our ways of seeing the world, but sometimes you have to. You have to acknowledge their shortcomings. So in the case of the first female students, I understand why they didn't want women to be educated until there was a separate residence facility, but at the same time, that kind of slowed things down. And I think that it shows that for some people at the college back then, um, our founding documents may have said that educating women was important, but I wonder sometimes how important it was. So I feel like maybe just sort of more firmly committing not only to the idea of educating women, but also more aggressively making sure that women had a place on campus. To be really cynical, I've often wondered, and you guys mentioned this in your presentation, I think, about how the number of female students on campus just exploded between like 1870 and 1872 or something like that. And I can't help but wonder, would the university have done that if we hadn't just barely survived a civil war and were broke? So in other words, what's our story there? Is it a story of commitment to justice, or is it a story of, damn, we're going to close if we don't let them in, so let's let them in? And I guess those are a little different depending how you look at it. So I would say that the most disappointing part is that they didn't more firmly and strongly express that support for coeducation in practice. And then the thing I think we did best was sort of publicly reminding the community that this is what the college was about. We published that initial statement on coeducation at the very beginning of the institution. And then once we started admitting women in the 1860s, they published that statement of coeducation in their catalog every year for like the next 40 years. So it was written right there for everyone to see. We educate men and women. And the other thing is, if the college was a bit slow, maybe in terms of really pushing female coeducation, the student body were certainly, at least the female students, were certainly much more aggressively pushing for that. If you look at some of the old digitized Union Literary magazines and some of the campus publications that we have in the archives online, there's all kind of interesting articles written by female students talking about the achievements of female students. The valedictorian of the campus was very often female in that period, and usually they published their valedictory addresses. And there's just some great stuff in there. So I think the campus community celebrating that tradition in the first few decades was the best thing about that.
If you were put in Alice Staples' shoes, do you feel like you would have like continued your Culver experience, or do you think you would have dropped out and found some like continued on later when more women were in the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I put myself in her shoes, or for that matter, the shoes of the first African-American students that came to campus in the 50s. And I think that must have been really hard. Would I have been able to stick through that and to make it out, successfully? And, maybe I'd be driven away, but I'd like to think that I would react probably how I imagine Alice Staples reacting, where she was probably saying to herself, this is an important moment. What does it say if the first female student enrolled in the university isn't successful? So I'm hoping I would have the same motivation that she had. And I don't have anything that I'm aware of that was written by Alice Staples about that moment that I've ever seen. But the fact that she and her husband went on to found another college, they went on to found the Southwest Bible College in Bolivar or something like that. The fact that they did that tells me they must have been pretty committed to it. So I'm kind of reading that attitude into her unfairly, I guess. But I'd like to think that I would have that kind of courage to stick it out, because I assume she probably knew if I just hang in there, a bunch more women are going to come through, and then we'll have a much more split campus. So I'd like to think I would do that. That's a good question. I like that.
This is probably going to be one of our last few questions. If Culver accepted female students around 30 years later than what they did, do you think Culver would be as successful?
Oh boy, I don't think so. I think one of the things that's been constant throughout the history of the institution is various kind of existential threats to the very survival of the college, whether you're talking about the Civil War or massive financial challenges at various times, or the university building burning down in 1903, whatever. There's a lot of challenges in our history. And I feel like, what if we hadn't had female students enrolled, and we were only trying to survive based on the enrollment of male students in the region? I don't think financially the institution would have survived. So I feel like if we had delayed that arrival much longer, I'm not sure we could have survived in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, which were apparently pretty lean years for the college. So I'm pretty sure when female students started to arrive in larger numbers, it was financially a godsend for the college. And if that hadn't happened, who knows, maybe we would have gone under, long before that.
And then our last question for this interview is going to be, what do you think is the most beneficial aspect of the class stories Blue and White?
That's a good question too. I guess I'm going to cheat like historians always do. I'm going to give you two answers instead of one. That's the move we usually go with. I guess my first answer would be, I just think it's important for students to get a sense of the college's history. Just to get a sense of the narrative, to think about themselves as part of a larger story of a place. I think when you're a college student, I know when I was a college student, I thought of my 4 years of college. Those were the only 4 years in the history of Hiram College, as far as I was concerned. I may have mentioned this in class. The guy that was president of Hiram when I was there, G. Benjamin Oliver, he was only president during the 4 years I was there. Yet in my brain, he's still the president, because when I was there, that's Hiram College. And I think that's a natural attitude for people to have. But I think if you can think about your career as you're following in the footsteps of people who paved the way for you, then it helps you to think about your obligation to pave the way, for future generations. So I guess I'd like to think that if students understand the history of the college, they'll feel more connected to the place, but then also they'll feel like they're part of this long story of improving your life through higher education that this place has been about for a really long time. And then the other thing, I think, to cheat and give you a second answer to your question, I guess the other answer I would give is just, I think that a class like Blue and White, learning how to talk to people and do interviews, and then hopefully being motivated to want to find out your own story, your family's story, your community's story, etc. I'm hoping you guys come away with that sense from the class, because I know I didn't even think about interviewing older relatives or older people in my hometown until I became a historian for my career. And by then, those people were dead. And I said to myself, damn, I wish I'd have thought to interview them when I had a chance. So maybe a class like this will get you guys to start thinking about the value of those kind of histories a little sooner. They say that when you're young, you don't see the value of history quite as much as you do when you get older. Maybe a class like this might help you guys, shorten that process a little bit and get you interested in your communities a little sooner.
Well, I just want to say thank you for letting us interview you.
My pleasure. I appreciate you guys trying the new technology, and we'll do some reviews in class and figure out how to make these better for the next go around. But this is great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow.